The auction block smelled of sweat, fear, and desperation. Alara stood in the line of Omegas waiting to be sold, her bare feet numb against the cold stone platform. She had stopped feeling her toes hours ago. She had stopped feeling much of anything days ago, when her stepmother had signed the papers and handed her over to the traders, like she was nothing more than livestock. 22 years of scrubbing floors, mending clothes, and swallowing her pride, and this was how it ended. On a wooden stage in a kingdom far from home, waiting for some stranger to buy her. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the crowded square, calling out prices for the Omega before her. A young girl, barely 17, sold for 12 gold pieces to a merchant with greedy eyes. Alara watched the girl be led away and felt her stomach turn. She hadn't eaten in 3 days. The traders didn't waste food on merchandise that might not sell, and Alara knew she wasn't the prettiest Omega on the block. She was too thin, too pale, with shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and endless labor. Her wolf had gone quiet inside her chest, curled up somewhere deep and unreachable, as if even her animal half had given up hope. Next, Omega female, 22 years, no prior bonds. The auctioneer grabbed her arm and shoved her forward. Alara stumbled, catching herself before she fell. The crowd below was a sea of faces, some curious, some bored, some hungry in a way that made her skin crawl. She lifted her chin and stared straight ahead, refusing to let them see her tremble. They could buy her body, but they would not buy her dignity. That was the one thing she had left. The bidding started low. 5 gold pieces. 6. The numbers crawled upward with painful slowness, and Alara felt each pause like a knife between her ribs. No one wanted her. She was too weak, too worn down, too broken. The auctioneer's frustration bled into his voice as he tried to drum up interest, pointing out that she was young, that she could still bear pups, that she would make a fine servant for any household. The words washed over her like dirty water. She had heard them all before. 10 gold pieces, someone called from the back of the crowd. Ilara's vision blurred, the edges of the world went soft and gray, and she realized with distant alarm that she was going to faint. Not here, she thought desperately. Not now. But her body had reached its limit. 3 days without food, a week of walking in chains, months of being worked to the bone before that. It was too much. Her knees buckled. The last thing she heard before the darkness took her was the auctioneer cursing and the crowd gasping, and then there was nothing at all. She woke to softness. That was the first thing she noticed, the impossible, overwhelming softness beneath her body. Alara's eyes fluttered open, and she found herself staring at a canopy of deep crimson silk. She was lying in a bed, not a cot or a pile of straw, but an actual bed, with pillows that smelled of cedar and clean linens that whispered against her skin. For a long moment, she simply lay there, convinced she was dreaming. Or dead. Perhaps she had died on that auction block, and this was whatever came after. Then she turned her head and saw him. He sat in a chair beside the bed, watching her with eyes the color of molten gold. His face was hard and angular, beautiful in a way that felt almost dangerous, like a blade that had been sharpened too many times. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and his jaw was set in a rigid line. He wore black from head to toe, and even sitting still, he radiated power, the kind of power that made her wolf stir for the first time in weeks, lifting its head in wary recognition. "You're awake," he said. His voice was low and rough, like gravel wrapped in velvet. Alara's heart slammed against her ribs. She knew that face. Everyone in the 5 kingdoms knew that face. It was carved into coins and painted on banners and whispered about in fearful tones by servants and nobles alike. She was in the bed of the Alpha King. And from the way he was looking at her, she wasn't going anywhere. Alara scrambled upright, ignoring the way her head spun and her vision swam. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to make herself as small and invisible as possible. The Alpha King was a legend wrapped in nightmares. They said he had killed his own father to take the throne. They said he showed no mercy to his enemies, that he had torn out the throats of rebels with his bare teeth. They said a lot of things. And right now, trapped in his bed with nowhere to go, Alara believed every single one of them. "Please," she whispered, hating the way her voice cracked. "I don't know why I'm here. I don't know what you want from me. But please, I'm no one. I'm nothing. I'm not worth your time." The Alpha King didn't move. He simply watched her with those unnerving golden eyes, his expression giving nothing away. Up close, she could see the faint scars that traced his jaw and disappeared beneath the collar of his black shirt. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 30, but there was something ancient in his gaze, something tired and hard and utterly unreadable. "You collapsed," he said finally, "at the auction. You hadn't eaten in days and your body gave out." He paused and something flickered in his eyes, something that might have been anger, though Alara couldn't tell if it was directed at her or at something else entirely. "I bought you before you hit the ground." The words landed like stones in her chest. Bought. She had been bought, just like she always knew she would be. The only surprise was the buyer. Alara forced herself to breathe, to think, to find some thread of logic in this impossible situation. Why would the Alpha King purchase a worthless Omega from an auction block? She wasn't beautiful. She wasn't powerful. She had nothing to offer a man who already had everything. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. His jaw tightened. For a long moment, he didn't answer, and Alara wondered if she had just made a terrible mistake. Then he rose from his chair, and she realized exactly how large he was. He towered over the bed, broad-shouldered and imposing, and when he moved, it was with the controlled grace of a predator who knew he had nothing to fear. "You will work in the palace," he said. "You will be assigned to my personal household. You will be fed, clothed, and given a room of your own. In return, you will serve where you are needed and cause no trouble." He paused at the door, his back to her. "Those are my terms. You will accept them." It wasn't a question. Ilara stared at his back, her mind racing. A room of her own, food, safety, or at least the illusion of it. It was more than she had ever been offered in her entire life. And yet something about this felt wrong. Too easy, too convenient. Men like the Alpha King didn't rescue worthless Omegas out of the goodness of their hearts. There had to be a catch. There was always a catch. "And if I refuse?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. He turned his head just enough for her to see his profile, the sharp line of his nose and the hard set of his mouth. "You won't." Then he was gone, the heavy door closing behind him with a sound like a tomb sealing shut. Alara sat alone in the massive bed, surrounded by silk and shadows, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. She was no longer property to be sold. She was property that had been claimed by the most powerful man in all 5 kingdoms, a man who terrified everyone he met, a man whose wolf, she realized with a jolt of shock, had been completely silent during their entire conversation. She hadn't sensed it at all, not a flicker, not a growl, not even the faintest brush of alpha dominance. It was as if his wolf didn't exist. The door opened again, and a young woman with kind eyes and auburn hair slipped inside. She carried a tray of food, bread, cheese, sliced fruit, and a steaming bowl of soup, and she smiled at Alara as if finding a strange Omega in the king's bed was the most normal thing in the world. "I'm Marin," the woman said, setting the tray on the bedside table. "I'm to be your guide while you settle in. The king has given orders that you're to eat, rest, and regain your strength." She tilted her head, studying Alara with open curiosity. "You're the first person he's ever brought back from an auction, you know. In 10 years on the throne, he's never once attended a slave market. Until today." Ilara's heart stuttered. She looked down at the food, then back at Marin. 1,000 questions burning on her tongue, but only one mattered. Why me? Marin's smile faltered, just for a moment. I don't know, she admitted, but I think you'd better figure it out before someone else does. 3 days passed, and Alara began to learn the rhythms of the palace. It was vast and cold, all gray stone and vaulted ceilings, filled with servants who moved like ghosts and guards who watched everything with sharp eyes. Marin showed her the kitchens, the laundry rooms, the winding corridors that connected the east wing to the west. She was given a small room on the third floor with a narrow bed, a wooden dresser, and a window that overlooked the gardens. It was more space than she had ever had to herself, and every night she lay awake staring at the ceiling, waiting for someone to burst in and tell her it had all been a mistake. No one came. The other servants treated her with cautious politeness, unsure what to make of the Omega who had arrived in the king's arms and been placed in his household without explanation. Alara kept her head down and worked hard, scrubbing floors and folding linens and carrying trays to and from the kitchens. It was familiar labor, the kind she had done her whole life, and she found comfort in the simplicity of it. At least here she was fed. At least here, no one hit her when she moved too slowly or forgot to bow. But she did not see the Alpha King, not once in 3 days. He was a ghost in his own palace, spoken of in hushed tones but never seen. Ilara told herself she was relieved. She told herself it was better this way, that the less attention she drew, the safer she would be. And yet she couldn't stop thinking about him, the gold of his eyes, the silence where his wolf should have been, the way he had looked at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. On the 4th night, Marin came to her room with an unexpected assignment. The king's personal chambers needed attending. His usual servant had fallen ill, and Alara was to take her place. Just for the evening, Marin assured her, just to bring his dinner and tend the fire, nothing more. Alara's hands trembled as she carried the tray through the darkened corridors. The king's chambers were in the north tower, isolated from the rest of the palace by a long stone bridge that groaned beneath her feet. She paused outside the heavy oak door, gathering her courage, and then knocked twice. Enter. His voice was muffled but unmistakable. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was larger than she expected, dominated by a massive fireplace that crackled with dying embers, and a bed even grander than the one she had woken in days ago. But Alara barely noticed any of it. Her attention was fixed on the Alpha King, who sat slumped in a chair by the window, his face pale and drawn, his hands gripping the armrests like he was fighting to stay upright. He looked terrible. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and a sheen of sweat glistened on his forehead despite the chill in the room. His breathing was shallow, labored, and when he turned to look at her, she saw something in his expression that she had never expected to see on the face of the most powerful man in 5 kingdoms. Pain. Raw, undisguised pain. "Set it down and leave," he said through gritted teeth. Alara should have obeyed. Every instinct told her to do exactly as he commanded, to place the tray on the table and flee before he decided she had seen too much. But her feet wouldn't move. She stood frozen in the doorway, the tray growing heavy in her hands, and watched as a tremor ran through his massive frame. "You're hurt," she said softly. His eyes flashed with something dangerous. "I said leave. The fire is almost dead. You'll freeze." She didn't know where the words came from, didn't know why she was arguing with a man who could kill her with a single swipe of his claws. But something in her chest ached at the sight of him suffering alone in the dark, and she found that she couldn't simply walk away. "Let me help, please." For a long moment, he just stared at her. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy, and Alara braced herself for his fury, for the growl, the command, the punishment that would surely follow her defiance. Instead, He closed his eyes and let out a breath that sounded like surrender. "The fire," he said quietly. "Just the fire. Then go." Alara set the tray down and moved to the hearth. She worked quickly, adding logs and coaxing the flames back to life, all too aware of his gaze on her back. The warmth spread through the room, chasing away the chill, and when she finally turned around, she found him watching her with an expression she couldn't name. "Why didn't you run?" he asked. His voice was softer now, rougher at the edges. "When I told you to leave, why did you stay?" She met his golden eyes and told him the truth. "Because no one should suffer alone, not even a king." Something shifted in his face. Something cracked, just for an instant, before the walls slammed back into place. He looked away, his jaw tight, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "You should be afraid of me." Alara picked up the empty tray and walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the handle, glancing back at him one last time. "Maybe," she said, "but I'm not." She left him sitting in the firelight, and she didn't see the way his hands unclenched for the first time in hours. She didn't see the way he stared at the door long after she was gone, something like wonder flickering in his tired eyes. The next evening, Alara was summoned to the North Tower again, and the evening after that, and the one after that. The king's regular servant remained ill, or so Marin claimed, though there was something knowing in her smile when she delivered the news each night. Alara didn't question it. She simply gathered the tray, climbed the winding stairs, and knocked on the heavy oak door. Each night, she found him in the same chair by the window. Each night, he looked a little less like death and a little more like a man. She tended the fire, set out his meal, and made sure the room was warm before she left. They rarely spoke. He watched her move through his space with those golden eyes, tracking her every step, and she pretended not to notice the way his gaze lingered on her face. On the fifth night, he broke the silence. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Alara hesitated. Servants didn't sit in the presence of the king. Servants didn't do anything except bow and scrape and make themselves invisible. But there was something in his voice that wasn't a command. It was closer to a request, rough and uncertain, as if he wasn't sure he had the right to ask. She sat. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows across the walls, and Alara studied him in the flickering light. He looked better than he had that first night, but there was still a tightness around his eyes, a tension in his shoulders that never seemed to ease. Whatever was wrong with him, it hadn't gone away. It was simply hiding, waiting, lurking beneath the surface. "You were sold by your family." It wasn't a question. His voice was flat, matter of fact, as if he were reciting information from a report. Alara's throat tightened. "My stepmother. She sold me after my father died. I was inconvenient." Inconvenient. He repeated the word like it tasted bitter on his tongue. "You served her household for years. You worked yourself half to death for people who saw you as nothing. And when they had no more use for you, they threw you away like garbage." The accuracy of it stung. Alara looked down at her hands, folded tightly in her lap, and willed herself not to cry. She had shed enough tears over her stepmother and stepsisters. She refused to shed any more, especially not in front of him. "How do you know all that?" she asked quietly. "I had you investigated." He said it without apology, without shame. "The moment I brought you here, I wanted to know everything, your history, your family, your weaknesses." A pause. "You have none, by the way. Weaknesses, at least none that I could find, only strength that no one bothered to see." Alara's head snapped up. She stared at him, searching his face for mockery or manipulation, but found neither. He was watching her with that unreadable expression, his golden eyes reflecting the firelight, and for the first time since she arrived at the palace, she didn't feel like a servant or a purchase or a puzzle to be solved. She felt seen. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. He looked away, his jaw working. When he spoke again, his voice was so low she had to lean forward to hear it. "Because I know what it's like. To be thrown away by the people who should have protected you. To be seen as nothing when you know you could be something." His hands curled into fists on the armrests. "I know what it's like to be alone." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy and raw. Alara's heart ached with a pain that wasn't her own. She wanted to reach out, to touch him, to offer some kind of comfort. But she didn't dare. Not yet. Instead, she asked the question that had been burning inside her since the first night. "Your wolf," she said softly. "I can't sense it. Not even a flicker. Why?" His entire body went rigid. The temperature in the room seemed to drop, and for a moment, Alara thought she had gone too far. She braced herself for his anger, for the dismissal, for the command to get out and never return. But he didn't yell. He didn't throw her out. He simply sat there, staring into the fire, and when he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. "Because he's dying." The words fell like stones into still water. "My wolf is dying, and when he goes, I go with him. The healers give me 6 months, maybe less." He turned to look at her, and she saw it now, the exhaustion, the resignation, the quiet despair that lived behind his golden eyes. "So you see, little Omega, you have nothing to fear from me. I'm not the monster everyone thinks I am. I'm just a dead man waiting for the end." Alara's breath caught in her chest. She thought of the silent wolf, the episodes of pain, the way he sat alone in the dark tower night after night. Not because he was cruel or cold, but because he was dying and he didn't want anyone to know. "Does anyone else know?" she asked. "No." His smile was bitter, broken. "Only you. And I have no idea why I just told you that." Alara rose from her chair. She crossed the space between them, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat, and did something that no servant should ever do. She knelt beside him, took his hand in hers, and held it tight. "Then I'll keep your secret," she said. "For as long as you need me to." He stared down at her, his expression cracking open like ice in spring, and for one impossible moment she thought she saw tears in the Alpha King's eyes. The days that followed changed everything. Alara was no longer just a servant tending the king's chambers. She was his secret keeper, his companion in the dark hours when the pain grew too fierce to bear alone. She brought him meals he actually ate. She read to him from books she found in his dusty library when his eyes were too tired to focus on the pages. She sat with him through the worst of his episodes, holding his hand while tremors racked his body and his wolf clawed weakly at the edges of his consciousness. She learned his name, not his title, not the fearsome legend, but the man beneath it all. Kalen. It meant warrior in the old tongue, and every time she whispered it in the firelit dark, something warm flickered in his golden eyes. "You shouldn't be here," he told her one night, when the episode had passed and he lay exhausted in his chair. His voice was hoarse, wrung out, but there was no command in it, only worry. "If someone finds out you've been spending your nights in the king's chambers, they'll talk. They'll assume things." "Let them assume." Alara wrung out a cool cloth and pressed it to his forehead. His skin was still too hot, his pulse still too fast, but the worst had passed. "I don't care what anyone thinks." "You should." His hand came up to catch her wrist, and the touch sent a spark racing through her veins. "I'm dying, Alara. Whatever this is between us, it can't lead anywhere. I won't do that to you." She met his eyes, her heart pounding. Whatever this is between us. He felt it too then. This pull, this ache, this impossible gravity that drew her to him night after night. She had tried to ignore it, tried to tell herself it was just compassion, just kindness, just the instinct to help someone who was suffering. But it was more than that. It had been more than that for weeks now, and she was tired of pretending otherwise. "You don't get to decide what I can handle," she said softly. "You don't get to push me away for my own good. I'm not a child, and I'm not fragile. I've survived things that would have broken most people, and I'm still here." She turned her wrist in his grip, lacing her fingers through his. "I'm still here, Kaylin, and I'm not going anywhere." His breath caught. She watched the war play out across his face, the fear, the longing, the desperate hope he was trying so hard to suppress. He was the Alpha King, the most powerful man in 5 kingdoms, and yet in this moment he looked utterly lost, like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, terrified to jump, but even more terrified to step back. "Elara." Her name was a ragged whisper on his lips. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to let someone in. Everyone I've ever trusted has betrayed me or left me or died. I can't—" His voice broke. "I can't lose you, too." She leaned closer, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, could see the flecks of amber in his golden eyes. "Then don't push me away. Let me stay. Let me be here, for whatever time we have left." Her free hand came up to cup his jaw, her thumb tracing the line of his cheekbone. "I'm not asking for forever. I'm just asking for now." Something shattered behind his eyes, the last wall, the final defense, crumbling to dust. He surged forward and captured her mouth with his, and the kiss was everything she hadn't known she was waiting for. It was desperate and tender and fierce all at once, his hands tangling in her hair, her fingers gripping the front of his shirt like she was drowning, and he was the only solid thing in the world. He tasted like honey and heartache, and when they finally broke apart, both of them gasping for air, Elara felt like she had been remade from the inside out. "I don't deserve you," he breathed against her lips. "I don't deserve any of this." "Maybe not." She smiled, her heart so full it ached. "But you have me anyway." He pulled her into his arms, tucking her against his chest, and she listened to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. It was slower now, calmer, as if her presence alone was enough to soothe the storm inside him. She closed her eyes and let herself believe, just for a moment, that everything would be all right. That love could be stronger than curses and death and all the dark forces conspiring against them. She didn't know that someone was watching from the shadows. She didn't see the figure slip away from the cracked door, didn't hear the soft footsteps retreating down the corridor. She didn't know that by morning everything would begin to unravel. But for now, wrapped in Kaylin's arms with the fire burning low, Elara let herself be happy. It had been so long since she'd felt anything like happiness that she had almost forgotten what it tasted like. She wouldn't forget again. The whispers started the next morning. Elara noticed them in the kitchens first, the way conversations died when she entered, the sidelong glances, the barely concealed smirks. She told herself it was nothing. Servants always gossiped, and a new Omega in the king's household was bound to attract attention. But by midday, the whispers had grown into something sharper, something cruel, and she couldn't ignore them any longer. "Did you hear? The little stray has been warming the king's bed." Shameless creature. Barely here a fortnight and already spreading her legs for the crown. As if he would ever actually want her. She's probably just a distraction, a toy to pass the time. The words cut deep, but Elara kept her head high and her face blank. She had survived worse than petty gossip. She had survived her stepmother's fists and her stepsister's cruelty and the humiliation of the auction block. A few venomous whispers from jealous servants would not break her. But then Lady Rowena arrived. She swept into the great hall like a winter storm, all silver hair and sharp cheekbones and a smile that didn't reach her ice-blue eyes. The servants bowed low as she passed, and even the guards seemed to shrink in her presence. Elara watched from the doorway, A stack of linens clutched to her chest as the woman approached the throne where Kaelin sat receiving his morning petitions. "My king." Lady Rowena's voice was honey poured over broken glass. "It has been too long since I visited court. I do hope you haven't forgotten our arrangement." Ilara's blood turned cold. She watched Kaelin's face, searching for some reaction, some explanation, but his expression was carved from stone, revealing nothing. "Lady Rowena." His voice was flat, formal. "I wasn't expecting you for another month." I heard troubling rumors. She climbed the steps to the throne, each movement deliberate and predatory, until she stood close enough to touch him. "Rumors about your health, about your wolf." Her smile sharpened. "About a certain Omega who has been keeping you company in the night." The hall fell silent. Every eye turned to the doorway where Ilara stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. Lady Rowena followed their gazes, and when her ice-blue eyes landed on Ilara, something dark and satisfied flickered in their depths. "Ah, there she is. The little servant girl who thinks she can play queen." Lady Rowena turned back to Kaelin, one elegant hand coming to rest on his shoulder. "Really, my king, I expected better of you. Dallying with purchased Omegas when you have a perfectly suitable bride waiting in the wings." Bride. The word hit Ilara like a physical blow. She stared at Kaelin, willing him to deny it, to explain, to say something, but he didn't look at her. He kept his eyes fixed on some point in the distance, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the armrests of his throne. "Lady Rowena and I have an understanding," he said finally. His voice was cold, distant, nothing like the man who had kissed her by the firelight. "An alliance between our houses was arranged years ago. It is expected." "Expected?" Lady Rowena laughed, a brittle sound that echoed through the hall. "Such a romantic way to describe our betrothal, but accurate, I suppose. The king needs an heir, and his wolf grows weaker by the day. Time is running out." She cast another glance at Ilara, her eyes glittering with malice. "Run along, little Omega. The adults have matters to discuss." Ilara couldn't breathe. The linens slipped from her numb fingers, tumbling to the floor in a heap of white fabric. She saw Marin rushing toward her, concern etched on her face, but the sound of her friend's voice seemed to come from very far away. All she could see was Kaelin on his throne, refusing to look at her. All she could feel was the shattering of something fragile and new in her chest. She turned and ran. The corridors blurred past her as she fled, tears streaming down her cheeks, her wolf howling with a pain she couldn't contain. She didn't know where she was going. She didn't care. She just needed to get away, to escape the humiliation and the heartbreak and the crushing weight of her own foolishness. Of course, there was a betrothal. Of course, there was someone else. Men like Kaelin didn't fall in love with women like her. She was a servant, a nobody, a worthless Omega bought from an auction block. She had let herself believe in fairy tales, and now reality had come crashing down around her ears. She found herself in the gardens, hidden behind a wall of hedges, her back pressed against cold stone as she sobbed. The sun was bright overhead, cheerful and warm, completely indifferent to her misery. She wrapped her arms around herself and tried to remember how to breathe. He had kissed her. He had held her. He had told her things he'd never told anyone else. And none of it had meant anything at all. Ilara requested a transfer that evening. She found the head housekeeper, a stern woman named Britta, and asked to be reassigned to the laundry rooms, anywhere but the North Tower, anywhere but near him. Britta studied her with knowing eyes but asked no questions, simply nodding and making a note in her ledger. By nightfall, Ilara had been moved to a smaller room on the ground floor, far from the winding stairs and the heavy oak door and the man who had made her believe in impossible things. She threw herself into work. She scrubbed linens until her hands were raw and red. She carried baskets of wet sheets to the drying lines until her arms ached. She worked until exhaustion dragged her into dreamless sleep each night, because dreams meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering, and remembering meant feeling the jagged edges of her broken heart. 3 days passed, then 4, then 5. The other servants noticed her silence, her hollow eyes, the way she flinched whenever someone mentioned the king's name. Marin tried to talk to her, tried to explain that things weren't what they seemed, but Alara couldn't bear to listen. She had been a fool once. She refused to be a fool twice. On the 6th night, she was folding sheets in the laundry room when the door burst open. She looked up, expecting Marin or one of the other workers, and her heart stopped. Kalen stood in the doorway, chest heaving, golden eyes wild. He looked terrible, worse than she had ever seen him. His skin was gray, his cheekbones sharp beneath paper-thin flesh, and he gripped the doorframe like it was the only thing keeping him upright. The sight of him sent a spike of fear through her chest that had nothing to do with anger. "You left." His voice was raw, wrecked. "You left, and you won't answer my summons, and I had to bribe 3 different servants just to find out where they moved you." Alara set down the sheet with trembling hands. "I didn't think you'd notice. You seemed rather occupied with your betrothed." The word hung between them like a blade. Kalen flinched as if she had struck him. "Rowena is not my betrothed. Not anymore." He took a shaky step into the room, then another. "The arrangement was made years ago, before my wolf began to die. I ended it the day after I brought you to the palace. She received my letter a week ago, which is why she came storming here to stake her claim." He stopped an arm's length away, close enough that she could see the desperation carved into every line of his face. "I should have told you. I should have explained before she arrived. But I didn't expect her so soon, and I didn't know how to say it. And then everything happened so fast." "You didn't defend me." The words came out sharper than she intended, edged with all the pain she had been trying to bury. "You sat on your throne and let her humiliate me in front of everyone. You wouldn't even look at me." His face crumpled. For a moment, he looked less like a king and more like a man who had lost everything that mattered. "I know." His voice broke on the words. "I know, and I'm sorry. I was trying to protect you. If Rowena thought I cared about you, truly cared, she would have destroyed you. She's dangerous, Alara. More dangerous than you know. I thought if I stayed cold, if I let her believe you meant nothing, she would leave you alone." He reached for her hand, then stopped, his fingers hovering in the air between them. "I was wrong. I was a coward, and I have regretted it every moment since you walked out of that hall." Alara stared at him, her heart at war with itself. Part of her wanted to believe him, wanted to fall into his arms and forgive everything. But another part, the part that had been abandoned and sold and thrown away by everyone she ever trusted, couldn't let go so easily. "How do I know this isn't another lie?" she whispered. "How do I know you won't freeze me out the next time it's convenient?" Kalen closed the distance between them in one stride. He dropped to his knees on the cold stone floor, looking up at her with eyes that held nothing back. No walls, no defenses, no royal mask. Just a dying man who had finally found something worth living for. "Because I love you." The words fell from his lips like a prayer. "I love you, Alara. I have loved you since you knelt beside my chair and held my hand and told me that no one should suffer alone. I love your kindness and your courage, and the way you see through every wall I build. I love you, and I would rather spend my last 6 months begging for your forgiveness than live a single day without you in my life." Tears spilled down her cheeks. She looked at the Alpha King kneeling at her feet, his pride shattered, his heart laid bare, and she felt something crack open inside her chest. "Get up," she said softly. His face fell. "Alara." "Get up," she repeated, "so I can kiss you properly." The hope that blazed in his eyes was brighter than the sun. He surged to his feet, his arms wrapping around her, and when his mouth found hers, she tasted salt and desperation and the fierce, aching sweetness of a love that refused to die. They didn't see Lady Rowena watching from the shadows of the corridor. They didn't see the cold fury that twisted her beautiful face, or the cruel smile that curved her lips as she turned and walked away. They didn't know that she had already set her plan in motion. The attack came 2 days later. Alara was bringing Kalen his evening tea when the guards seized her. They appeared from nowhere, 4 of them, grabbing her arms and wrenching them behind her back before she could even scream. The tray clattered to the floor, porcelain shattering, hot liquid spreading across the stones. "What are you doing?" She struggled against their grip, but they were too strong. "Let me go! I haven't done anything!" "By order of Lady Rowena," the captain growled, "you are under arrest for the attempted murder of the Alpha King." The words didn't make sense. Alara stared at him, her mind refusing to process what she was hearing. Murder? She would never. She could never. The tea. Lady Rowena's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. She emerged from the shadows of the corridor, her ice-blue eyes gleaming with triumph. The healers have confirmed it. Wolfsbane mixed into the king's evening tea, enough to kill even the strongest alpha. She tilted her head, studying Alara with mock sympathy. Did you really think no one would notice? Did you think you could poison him and take the throne for yourself? "I didn't do this," Alara's voice cracked with desperation. "I would never hurt him. I love him." Rowena laughed, a cold and brittle sound. How touching. The purchased Omega claims to love the king she was trying to murder. She waved a dismissive hand at the guards. "Take her to the dungeons. She can await trial there." They dragged her through the corridors, past servants who stared and whispered, past guards who wouldn't meet her eyes. Alara screamed for Kalen, screamed until her throat was raw, but no answer came. The dungeons were cold and dark, and when they threw her into a cell and slammed the iron door shut, the sound echoed through her bones like a death knell. She didn't know how long she sat there in the darkness. Hours, maybe. Days. Time lost all meaning in the endless black. She pressed her back against the damp stone wall and tried to think, tried to find some way out of this nightmare. But her mind kept circling back to the same terrible questions. Where was Kalen? Did he believe Rowena's lies? Was he already dead from the poison that someone else had slipped into his tea? The thought made her want to scream, made her want to tear down the walls with her bare hands. But she was just an Omega, powerless and alone, and no one was coming to save her. Then she heard the footsteps. They were slow and uneven, accompanied by a dragging sound that made her heart clench with recognition. She scrambled to her feet, pressing herself against the bars of her cell, and when the torchlight finally illuminated the figure approaching, she nearly collapsed with relief. Kalen looked like death walking. His skin was ashen, his eyes sunken, and he leaned heavily on Marin's shoulder as he limped toward her cell. But he was alive, and he was here, and when his gaze found hers through the bars, she saw fury burning in those golden depths. "Open it," he commanded. His voice was weak but left no room for argument. The guard fumbled with his keys, and then the door was swinging open and Alara was in Kalen's arms. He held her so tightly she could barely breathe, his face buried in her hair, his whole body trembling. "I'm sorry," he rasped. "I'm so sorry. I was unconscious when they took you. By the time I woke, you were already in the dungeons and Rowena was telling everyone." He pulled back, cupping her face in his hands. "I never believed it. Not for a second. You could never hurt me. I know that. I know you." "The poison," she whispered. "Are you—" The healers purged most of it. His jaw tightened. "But it accelerated the damage to my wolf. I have weeks now, not months." He said it flatly, like it didn't matter, like his own death was secondary to the fury coursing through his veins. Rowena did this. She poisoned my tea and framed you for it. She wanted you executed and me weak enough to control. Ilara's blood ran cold. She'll try again. As long as she's free, she'll keep trying until one of us is dead. I know. Kaelin's eyes hardened into something dangerous. That's why we're ending this tonight. He took her hand, his grip fierce despite his weakness. There's going to be a trial. Not for you, for her. I've already summoned the council, and Marin has found evidence of Rowena's treachery. Letters to her allies, plans to seize the throne once I'm dead. His smile was sharp as a blade. She wanted to play games with the crown. Now she'll learn what happens when you threaten what the Alpha King loves. He pulled Ilara close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Stay beside me, he murmured against her skin. Whatever happens next, stay beside me. She laced her fingers through his and held on tight. Always. The great hall was packed with nobles, servants, and guards when Ilara walked through the doors at Kaelin's side. She felt every eye turn toward her, felt the weight of their judgment and curiosity pressing against her skin. But Kaelin's hand was warm in hers, and she kept her chin high as they made their way to the front of the room. Lady Rowena stood in chains before the throne, her silver hair disheveled and her ice-blue eyes blazing with hatred. Gone was the elegant predator who had swept into court days ago. In her place was something cornered and desperate, a woman who had gambled everything and lost. This is absurd, Rowena spat as Kaelin took his seat on the throne. You have no proof of anything. That Omega tried to kill you, and you're too besotted to see the truth. Kaelin's expression didn't flicker. He raised one hand and Marin stepped forward, carrying a bundle of letters tied with black ribbon. These were found in Lady Rowena's chambers, Marin announced, her voice ringing clear through the hall. Correspondence with Lord Varen of the Eastern Territories, detailing a plan to poison the king and blame the Omega Ilara for the crime. Once the king was dead and Ilara executed, Lady Rowena would claim the throne through her former betrothal rights and marry Lord Varen to secure military support. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Rowena's face went white, then red, her composure shattering like glass. Lies! She shrieked. Forgeries! That servant girl fabricated everything to save her own worthless skin. The letters bear your seal, Kaelin said coldly. Your handwriting, your personal cipher, which only you and your closest allies know. He leaned forward, and despite his weakness, the authority in his voice was absolute. You poisoned me, Rowena. You tried to murder the woman I love, and you would have destroyed this kingdom to feed your own ambition. Rowena lunged against her chains, her face twisted with fury. You were supposed to be mine. I waited years for you, endured your coldness, your distance, your pathetic devotion to a dying wolf. And then you threw me aside for some auction block whore who isn't fit to lick my boots. The hall fell silent. Ilara felt the blood drain from her face, but before she could react, Kaelin was on his feet. He descended the steps of the throne slowly, each movement deliberate, until he stood directly in front of Rowena. You call her unfit, he said softly. But she has more worth in her smallest finger than you have in your entire being. She held my hand through the darkest nights of my life. She saw me at my weakest and chose to stay. She loved me when I had nothing to offer but pain and death. His voice rose, carrying to every corner of the hall. Ilara is not an auction block whore. She is the woman who saved my soul. And before this court, before my people, before the gods themselves, I am going to make her my queen. The words hit Ilara like a thunderclap. She stared at Kaelin's back, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. He turned to face her, and the love in his eyes stole the breath from her lungs. He crossed the distance between them and dropped to one knee. The crowd erupted in whispers, but Ilara couldn't hear any of it. All she could see was Kaelin, the Alpha King, kneeling before her like she was the most precious thing in the world. I don't have a ring, he said, and there was a hint of that dry humor she had grown to love. I didn't exactly plan this speech, but I know what I want, and I'm done waiting. He took her hand, pressing it to his chest, right over his heart. Elara, you came into my life broken and beaten and more beautiful than anything I'd ever seen. You made me want to live when I had already accepted death. You are my mate, my heart, my home. Will you marry me? Tears streamed down her cheeks. She looked at this impossible man, this king who had seen her when no one else would, who had fought for her when she had nothing, who loved her without reservation or condition, and she gave him the only answer she had ever wanted to give. Yes. Her voice broke on the word. Yes, I'll marry you. He surged to his feet and swept her into his arms, kissing her deeply while the great hall erupted into cheers. Somewhere behind them, Rowena screamed her fury, but the guards were already dragging her away, and Elara couldn't bring herself to care. She was in Kaelin's arms. She was going to be his queen, and for the first time in her life, she was exactly where she belonged. The wedding took place 3 weeks later, in the same great hall where Rowena had been condemned. But now the room was transformed, filled with flowers and candlelight, and the faces of people who had become Elara's family. Maren stood at her side as she walked down the aisle, tears streaming down her cheeks and a smile so wide it hurt. The servants who had once whispered behind her back now watched with something like awe, and Elara held her head high as she made her way to the man waiting at the altar. Kaelin looked like a dream carved from starlight. He wore black and silver, his dark hair swept back from his face, his golden eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her knees weak. When she reached him, he took her hands in his, and she felt the tremor in his fingers. Not from weakness, but from emotion so powerful it couldn't be contained. "You're beautiful," he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and discover this was all a fever dream." "If it's a dream," she whispered back, "then I never want to wake up." The ceremony was simple and sacred, words exchanged under the watchful eyes of the old gods and the new. When the officiant pronounced them mated and married, Kaelin kissed her like she was air and he was drowning, and the hall erupted into cheers that shook the rafters. But the true miracle came later that night. They were alone in their chambers, wrapped in each other's arms, when Elara felt it. A stirring in her chest, warm and golden, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. She gasped, and Kaelin pulled back, his brow furrowed with concern. "What is it? What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." She pressed her hand to his chest, right over his heart, and her eyes went wide. "Kaelin, your wolf. I can feel him." He froze. For a long moment he didn't breathe, didn't move, didn't blink. Then his eyes fluttered closed, and when they opened again, they were brighter than she had ever seen them. Tears spilled down his cheeks as a sound escaped his throat, half laugh, half sob. "He's there," Kaelin breathed. "He's weak, but he's there. He's not dying anymore." He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. The mate bond. The healers said it was impossible, that nothing could save him, but the bond. You... His voice cracked. "You saved me. Again." Elara held him as he shook, her own tears falling freely. She thought of the auction block, the cold stone beneath her feet, the moment she had collapsed and expected to die. She thought of waking in a stranger's bed, of holding a king's hand in the dark, of learning that love could grow in the most barren soil. No one should suffer alone, she had told him once, and now neither of them ever would again. Months later, when the first snow of winter blanketed the kingdom in white, Elara stood on the balcony of the palace and watched the flakes drift down from a pewter sky. Kaelin's arms wrapped around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder, his hand splayed protectively over the gentle swell of her belly. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. She turned in his embrace, looking up at the man who had given her everything she never dared to dream of. A home, a family, a love so fierce and true that it had conquered death itself. I was happy the moment you bought me at that auction, she said. I just didn't know it yet. He laughed, low and warm, and kissed her beneath the falling snow. And somewhere deep inside her, their child kicked, as if already eager to join the story that was only just beginning.